everybody, this is Laura at PrepScholar. We're gonna get started in about 1 minute. We do want to start on time, but we also know that several folks are joining from another meeting or from another commitment. So I want to make sure everyone's here for the start. So give us about 60 seconds and we'll get started. All right, it's 12:02, so I think we're going to get started. I see a few people are still joining, but that's all right. Again, my name is Laura. I am here with my colleague, Erika, who's actually going to be leading today's presentation, and we are excited to bring you 5 very difficult sentence corrections. Erika is going to be walking you through not only these questions and explanations, but how we found them, as well as some themes and patterns that you can really learn from them and take away to improve your sentence correction skills in the future. So we're really looking forward to the seminar. We're planning to talk for about 45 or 50 minutes, and then we'll leave the last 10 or 15 open for questions. So here's the agenda, what you can expect to see over the next hour. First, Erika will talk a bit about some of the themes that we picked up across the 5 questions and what you can learn as a GMAT student about sentence correction skills through these questions. She's also going to talk a bit about how we found these questions. So as you know, there are several sources out there, Beat the GMAT forums being one of them, where you can find really difficult questions of different skills. And so she's going to go over what we think is one of the best ways to go about finding the most difficult questions available. Then she's going to dive right into the questions. So we've got 5 of them picked out. She'll go through the question themselves, as well as the explanation and some of the tips for each of the questions. And then we, of course, are from PrepScholar, PrepScholar GMAT. We're a online GMAT course. And so want to give you a little bit of information about us and our course and what makes us different. And then we've actually got a $100 off course code at the end for students who are interested in signing up for our course. It's exclusive to students who are on the webinar, so congratulations to you. So we'll be showing that at the end, right before we go into questions and answers. One thing I did want to say, I saw a question come through earlier. If you have to leave early, this webinar will be recorded and put on the Beat the GMAT YouTube channel in 24 hours. So feel free to go onto that to finish the webinar if you need to leave early. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Erika. Oh, and here's a little bio about who we are. So I'm on the left there. I'm the GMAT director here at PrepScholar. I'm actually a Wharton MBA alum. And I scored a 710 on the GMAT.
And hello, I'm Erika. I'm the PrepScholar GMAT content manager. I have a lot of experience as a tutor and a curriculum developer, both for the GMAT and for other graduate tests. And I got a 770 on the GMAT. And so I'm going to be handling the webinar pretty much moving forward. Thank you, Laura, for the intro. Alrighty. So we're going to start off by going over a couple of the main things that we can take away from really hard sentence correction questions. And these are points that are going to come up across the different questions that we've chosen. So we'll start at the top. One of the biggest points with hard sentence correction questions is that you really need to memorize some rules. And a lot of these rules are pretty complicated. Once you get up to these higher level sentence correction questions, a lot of them get into some pretty complicated stuff. And oftentimes, if you want to get the answer totally 100% correct, you really do need to know some of these rules. However, there are a few different things that you can do to mitigate this, to make some of these harder sentences easier. One of the things that's really common across hard sentence correction questions is that they have a really complex sentence structure. So we're going to walk through some techniques for how you can simplify those sentence structures down and make it easier to find some of these hidden errors. We're also going to talk about how sentences that have a lot of errors can sometimes seem like they're going to be more challenging, but actually they provide multiple chances to either be totally sure of your correct answer or to at least eliminate a lot of the wrong answer options. So sometimes multiple errors is a blessing in disguise. And then finally, we're going to talk about how sometimes at the end of the day, with really hard sentence correction questions, it comes down to issues of meaning. So even if you're totally prepared, have all of the grammar rules memorized, sometimes you actually need to read the sentence to get the answer correct. Okay. So really quickly, we're going to talk about how we found these 700 level sentence correction questions and how you can find some of these really hard questions on your own. So we started with real GMAT materials. At PrepScholar, we believe that it's really important to practice with the best materials out there. And the absolute best materials of all are materials that are released by GMAC, the makers of the test. So we started with real GMAT materials. We specifically used the GMATPrep software. Then we took advantage of the computer adaptive algorithm. We had our experts go through and take the verbal section and get every single question right. Now, because of that, the algorithm kept spitting out harder and harder questions. So by the end, we were getting the hardest questions out there. So from that, we collected a master list of the hardest sentence correction questions that were available. Then we went to online forums like Beat the GMAT, and we went through and we found the questions that students struggled with the most, the ones that were posted the most frequently, the ones that were labeled in some places as 700 level. And the result was that we pulled the 5 hardest sentence correction questions you could possibly see on the GMAT. And that's what we're going to go over today. Okay. Question number 1 is Athenian women. So a lot of these questions are really, really long, as we discussed. So we're going to just take a minute to let you look over these and get kind of a feel for the question. Okay, so before we move in, just a quick clarification. So these are 5 of the hardest questions. Not going to make the hard call that they are the hardest out there, but they are some of the hardest real GMAT questions out there. And we specifically chose ones that we thought kind of encapsulated some of the really common things on the GMAT among hard questions. So it's kind of a bit of both. It's both the hardest questions and questions that represent common issues with hard questions. Okay, so hopefully you've had enough time to look over this question, but probably the first thing you're noticing is that this is a really long and pretty complicated sentence. So what can we do to make our lives easier? Maybe it's hard to find errors when there are so many words, so much punctuation, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to go into our first tip, which is that when you have a long and complicated sentence, you can get rid of anything that is unnecessary to the grammar of the sentence. Now, there are a couple of ways you can do that. The number one way is to get rid of parts of the sentence that are set off by commas. So this can be stuff at the beginning or the end of the sentence that's set off by a single comma, or it can be a descriptive phrase that's set off with 2 commas in the middle of a sentence. You can also get rid of long descriptive phrases, so things that function like an adjective or an adverb. And basically what this is going to allow us to do is to cut out all of the unnecessary stuff and have a much simpler sentence. A really important thing to kind of take away here is that anything that's unnecessary to the meaning of the sentence is also going to be unnecessary to the grammar of the sentence. So let's look at our original question. So this is just answer choice A. So we see it says, based on records from ancient Athens, each year young Athenian women collaborated to weave a new woolen robe that they used to dress a statue of the goddess Athena, and that this robe depicted scenes of a battle between Zeus, Athena's father, and giants. That's really, really, really long. So what can we do to cut some of this out? Well, first thing we should see is that the very start of our sentence is set off by a comma. And if we look more closely at it, it's kind of describing where this information is coming from. It's based on records from ancient Athens. So we can go ahead and cut that out. Then, going through the rest of our sentence, each year is describing when these women collaborated. We can cut that out. Young and Athenian describes women. Do we really need to know they're young and Athenian? No. It's cool information, but not necessary. We'll cut that out. All right, so we've got women collaborated to weave a robe. Do we need new and woolen? No. Then this whole next part that they used to dress a statue of the goddess Athena is all describing robe. So we can cut that out as well. Then finally, between Zeus, Athena's father, and giants, all describes battle. We'll cut that as well. So we end up with a much simplified sentence. Women collaborated to weave a robe, and that this robe depicted scenes of a battle. So we're actually going to go ahead and use that as our sentence moving forward. So now that our sentence is much simpler, we can actually clue in on something pretty important, which is the word and. And is a really great indicator of parallelism. So what we're going to do is make sure that everything before the and is parallel with the stuff after the and. So here's our tip. If you see and, look for parallelism errors. So and can appear in lists of 2 ideas, or it can appear in lists of 3+ items. So that would be a list with commas. And parallelism is an incredibly common thing to be tested on the GMAT, and it appears a lot in these hard questions. We're going to see it again. All right. So this is one of the things that I like to do to make parallelism more clear, which is to show things in different colors to represent different parts of speech. So here we've got our nouns in blue and we've got some verbs in green. So we see women collaborated to weave a robe, and that this robe noun depicted verb scenes of a battle. So we've got nouns, we've got verbs, but we have this weird that really doesn't fit with our parallelism. So actually this is kind of weird and not super grammatical. So we can go in and we can eliminate A for having that strange that. So to find our correct answer, we want to find something that also mirrors the that. We see that that is in our non-underlined portion, so we really can't change it. So we actually need to add a that in our underlined portion. So we've gone through and kind of marked all of the that's that appear. We see there's none in B, there's none in E, but we see that there's a that in both C and D. So we could go in and test both, but if we've got eagle eyes, we might notice that our that in C is actually in the same place as it was in A. And that means that in A, we actually cut that out because it was descriptive information. So probably in C, we're going to end up doing the same thing. So maybe let's try D, where it does something new. It puts the that in a new place. So we're actually going to go through and do our sentence simplification process all over again with answer choice D. All right, so here we don't have anything set off by commas, but we do have a lot of descriptive information. So I'll just pause here for just a minute so you can take a look at what we've gone ahead and cut out. We have a lot of the same stuff as before, like new woolen, each year, with which they dressed. We have from ancient Athens now, but we cut out all of that extra stuff and we ended up with a much simpler sentence. We have records indicate that women collaborated to weave a robe and that this robe depicted scenes of a battle. So once again, we have this and, right? So let's see if now we have the correct parallelism. So basically what we're doing here is we're taking everything before the and making that its own list item, and everything after the and making it its own list item. So now we see we actually have perfect parallelism. We have that's on each part, we have a noun, and we have a verb. So this works great. Now notice this parallelism would have been much harder to see if we'd left our whole long sentence there. So this is a really great trick for identifying errors in complicated sentences. It makes our lives much easier. So we can actually go in and pick answer choice D without even testing a lot of our answers. This one is the only one that has correct parallelism. All right, so we'll move on to question 2. And we're going to see some similar things crop up here. So take a look at this question and see if you can identify where we might do some similar stuff. Okay, so this one is slightly shorter, but we do see quite a few commas, so we might be thinking maybe we'll go in and do some simplification stuff later. But we might notice something kind of new. And this one's kind of tricky. This is where our note about the rules comes in. So we might notice the word considered. Now, if this doesn't ring any bells for you, that's okay. This is a pretty specific rule. On the GMAT, considered is a classic idiom. So on the GMAT, we need to use the idiom consider X, Y, not consider as or consider to be. So an example, if I were on the GMAT writing a question, I would say, I consider my dog very cute. So X here is my dog and Y is very cute. Now, in real life, I might say, I consider my dog to be very cute, or I consider my dog as very cute. And you guys would know exactly what I'm saying, and it would make complete sense, and nobody would correct me. But on the GMAT, this really matters. So I would recommend memorizing this rule right now. This is one of a few idiom errors that the GMAT really likes to use. And unfortunately, it just relies on memorization. Tragically, it's not something that we can apply in text context and figure it out. So this is one of our difficult 700 level rules.
One question, do you need the comma? Does the comma after X, comma Y mean something, or is it consider X, Y?
Let's look at our example. No, you don't actually need the comma. So sometimes, great question from Laura, sometimes you will see the comma, sometimes you won't. Yeah, so good note. Okay, so if we look back at our question, we see here that 3 of our answer choices use either considered as or considered to be. You might notice the tense changed a little bit. We went into past tense, doesn't matter. If we're using considering, will consider, considers, doesn't matter. We still can't have as or to be. So if we know this idiom, we can actually go ahead and eliminate 3 answer choices right off the bat. Now, if you didn't know this, it's okay. We're going to go over some ways that you can get pretty close to the correct answer, even if you didn't know it. All right, so we're still left with a couple of answer choices. So let's start with our first one and see what we can do. So we should notice in our first one, we have quite a few commas, and we should actually notice that our first little bit of the sentence is set off with a comma. Now, all of this is not underlined, so it really shouldn't have much bearing on our underlined portion. So we're just gonna go ahead and cut that right out and make our lives a little bit more simpler. We've still got, you know, a bit of a sentence left, but let's get rid of it. We don't need it. Now, with our simplified sentence, once that other comma is out of the way, we see another comma, but it's an interesting situation because we have a comma and. Now, maybe you guys have heard of your fanboys before, probably. This is something we should really be keeping an eye out for. So if you see a comma with a conjunction next to it, you should look for sentence structure errors. So when you have a comma and a conjunction, that is a signal that you have two sentences that you've shoved together. So I could say, for example, I like dogs, I think dogs are cute, as two sentences, or I could combine them as I like dogs, comma, and I think dogs are very cute. Kind of a running theme here. So if we see a comma and or a comma but or any of our other coordinating conjunctions, we need to look at everything on the beginning of the comma and everything after the and to see if they can stand on their own as sentences. Now, it doesn't matter if one of those is a complete sentence and the other one's a fragment. If at least one of those parts is a fragment, that means the whole sentence is a fragment. So let's try this with answer choice A. All right, so where we see and, the comma and, we're actually just gonna go ahead and put a period and pretend like it's two separate sentences. So we see Jupiter's moon Europa has long been considered far too cold to support life. Cool, that is a complete sentence. We've got a noun, which is Jupiter's moon Europa, and we've got a verb, has long been considered. Now, looking at the second part, with 60 square miles of water. Okay, that's not a sentence. That's a fragment. So that means our whole sentence in A is going to be a fragment. So we can actually go in and eliminate A, which means that B has got to be our correct answer. And we could go in and do our same comma rule and determine, yes, this is a complete sentence. Now, back to that previous point, what if you didn't know the considered rule? Well, it turns out we can actually go in with our comma rules and eliminate a lot of stuff from both answers D and E, such that we can figure out that it's not a complete sentence on its own. In fact, D ends up reading Jupiter's moon Europa and its 60 square miles of water, nothing else. There's no verb in our sentence. So we can eliminate D on that basis as well. Same thing with E, Jupiter's moon Europa and to have 60 square miles of water. So here our rule with the commas with simplifying sentences actually allows us to get down to between B and C, even without knowing our considered rule. However, if we don't know how considered and considered as works, we're probably going to have to guess between B and C here. So having multiple errors helps us with this question if we don't know how one of them's working, but we do really need to know the rules in the end to get the answer totally right.
One question, Erika. What if two options can stand on their own? So in this example, no option could stand on their own. What if two of them can stand on their own? That means that one of them probably has another type of error in it, right?
Yes, yes. So if we end up having two answer choices where neither of them have an error with that sentence structure, that means there's probably something else going on. So there might be an agreement issue, maybe there's another idiom error, possibly an error in meaning. In that case, there's, just a third error. So we have another opportunity there to get it right, but we just have to keep looking. Awesome. Okay, so here's question number 3, which is Holstein cows. Probably noticed right off the bat a bunch more commas. So we might actually do something kind of interesting and new here. So take a look, go ahead and read through, and then we'll start right in. Alrighty, so hopefully you've had enough time to look at this one. And you might have noticed that the first sentence is kind of complicated. We've got what might be a list, and a lot of commas, looks like probably quite a few errors. One of the things that I like to do when I'm not super sure what's going on immediately is look at my different answer choices and see what changes between them. And we're gonna see that there's a lot of things that change between them. We see providing goes to provided. We see the addition of a them in A and B. We see milking, milked. We see producing, produces, and produce. But there's actually one thing that we should see that's pretty simple. And this should be something that we pick up on right away. So we actually see that the noun cows switches over to cow in a couple of these answer choices. Now, a lot of the rules on the GMAT are really hard, but agreement, number agreement, is not very tricky. This is something you've been doing since elementary school. But on the GMAT, they put it in really difficult context. Still, it's a pretty easy rule and one that you definitely know. So when we have a plural noun, we also want to have plural pronouns, and we want to have plural verbs. When we have a singular noun, we want to have singular pronouns and singular verbs. So if you see answer choices where there's a switch between singular and plural, you should look for verb or pronoun agreement errors. So if you have a plural noun, you want everything else in the sentence to also be plural. If you've got a singular noun, you want to have a singular pronoun and singular verbs. So here, we're going to go ahead and scan the sentence for verbs or pronouns, and we should clue in right away on them. So them, we notice, is in our non-underlined portion, which means we cannot change it, which means everything in our underlined portion needs to match that. So them is plural, and we see it's the farmer who takes care to keep them cool. Who would a farmer be keeping cool? Cows. So we see that cows is going to need to be plural to match our them. So we can go through and eliminate all of our answer options where our noun is singular. So we can eliminate here B and D, which has cow. All right, so that made our lives a little bit easier, but now what? Well, we should probably clue in on the fact that we've got a couple of commas up here. We've got the farmer who takes care to keep them cool. Okay, and the farmer is also providing them with high energy feed and is also milking them regularly. So we've got a list of things that the farmer is doing here. And these things are allowing these cows to produce milk. So what do we do when we see a list? Well, we've already talked about that. We should look for parallelism. So let's go ahead and do the same thing we did in question 1 with Athenian women here and see, are the items in our list parallel? Do they have the same grammatical structure? So looking at A, we've got the farmer who takes care to keep them cool, providing them with high energy feed, and milking them regularly. So here I've gone in and used colors to show the difference, but on your test you can use different kinds of underlines, different circles or squares or symbols on your scratch paper to keep track of this. But we see takes care is a just present tense verb, but providing and milking are both ing verbs. So these actually aren't the same. They're both verbs, but they're not the same tense. So these actually aren't parallel. So we can go on and eliminate A. So now we're between C and E. So let's try the same thing with C. So here we've actually changed our intro a little bit to try to match these two up. So we've got the farmer takes care to keep them cool. The farmer takes care to keep them provided with high energy feed. Sounds good so far. We've got an adjective and another adjective, all describing how the farmer is keeping them, the cows. But then we have, again, milking them regularly. So we've got an adjective, and an ing verb. So that's no good, not parallel. We can eliminate C. So at this point, we could just pick pick E, but let's go in and check just to make sure it's parallel. All right, and we see the farmer takes care to keep them cool, provided, and milked. So there we go. That's 3 different adjectives. Now, we might see provided and milked and go, oh, that's a past tense verb, but actually here it's functioning as an adjective. So it's all describing how these cows are being kept. So we can go in and we can pick E as our correct answer. So again, parallelism rules worked for us here. And we also used looking for differences between singular and plural nouns to eliminate a couple of answers right off the bat. Okie doke. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
We have one question about this one. So producing versus will provide at the end of the sentence, at the sentence end, can that be used to eliminate an option as well?
It can, absolutely. So great question there. This is another example of how we can actually use multiple errors to eliminate answer options here. So we can look at the tense of the whole sentence and figure out, do we want an ing verb? Does it really make sense to have it here? No, not really. We're talking about present tense. The farmer takes care. We can also look at produce versus produces. Again, we want something that's plural. We have them. So produces makes no sense. So we can actually eliminate answer options based on this as well. So great point. Again, if we missed out on the parallelism, there are still really good options here for eliminating some of these other answer choices. Okay, so we're gonna move on to question 4 now. Take a minute to look this one over. This is kind of a weird one. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to read through this one. So this is kind of interesting because, like number 2, if you know a very specific rule, you can jump in right away and start noticing some interesting stuff here. So we might notice that there is a switch between as and unlike. Now this is interesting because there are actually 2 components to this one. So if we see like or unlike, they both work the same, or as, we should look for both parallelism and idiom errors. So this is because like or unlike and as both signal a comparison. Now comparisons work a lot like lists. They compare one thing to another thing, and those 2 things need to be parallel. So an example that I hear a lot, someone might say a fish's eye, unlike a shark, is really not good at seeing. That was a bad sentence. But here we're comparing a fish's eye to a shark, the animal. So we're comparing an eye to an animal. That doesn't make very much sense. So we'd actually need to go, a fish's eye, unlike a shark's eye, is not very good at seeing. So we need to compare 2 things that are parallel, 2 things that make sense being compared. We also have another rule, which is a little more complicated. So remembering that comparisons need parallel structure, this is something you can apply on test day. Now, like as a specific comparative word compares objects or nouns, whereas as compares actions or verbs. Now this is one of those things like our consider rule earlier that you just need to memorize. This is an idiomatic issue. So having this memorized can also help to identify other errors that are going on in addition to these parallelism errors. So let's go ahead, keeping both of these rules in mind, and look at our sentences. So we're going to start with A. Now, what you may have noticed in the original sentence, I'll go back really quickly, is that as there are for cod and haddock actually shows up kind of in the middle of our sentence. So because it's set off by commas, I've actually gone ahead and taken it out and put it somewhere else to make it a little bit easier to compare. Now remember, when things are set off by commas, we can kind of move them around. So let's go ahead and look back at this. So I've put in a ... where our little bit used to be, just to make it easier to see. So in A, we see there are no legal limits on the size of monkfish that can be caught, as there are for cod and haddock. So here, legal limits in that second portion is implied. Since we've already said there are no legal limits, we can just say as there are, and we can assume it's also legal limits here. So we see we have there are no legal limits versus there are legal limits. So that's actually totally parallel. And we also see that we're using as, which is a comparison word that we use with verbs, actions like are. So we see that A is actually totally cool. There's no real issues there. There might be issues somewhere else, but for now, let's keep going with our as and unlike thing. So let's try B. It's possible that all of these unlikes are just not gonna work. So with B, we see there are no legal limits on the size of monkfish that can be caught, same thing as before, unlike cod and haddock. So we have the status of whether or not there are legal limits versus some fish. That doesn't really make sense. We could compare monkfish to cod and haddock, or legal limits on monkfish to legal limits on cod and haddock, but we can't compare whether or not there's legal limits to a bunch of fish. That doesn't make sense. We also have the issue that we have unlike. So remember, like and unlike compare to nouns, but we only have a noun in the second part. In the first part, we have a verb. So unlike doesn't actually work here either. So we can go ahead and eliminate B. Let's look at D and E and see if our unlike creates issues there as well. So D, we have unlike cod and haddock, there are no legal limits on catching monkfish. So again, we're comparing a noun, some fish, to whether there are legal size limits. So again, not parallel, and again, unlike can't go with both a noun and a verb. Doesn't work. And then if we look at E, again, same thing. We've got catching, cod and haddock. Here, it looks like an ing verb. It's actually acting as a noun here, like the act of catching fish. And then we have a verb. So again, doesn't work. We can go ahead and eliminate E as well. So just recognizing that we have a comparison here was enough to help us eliminate 3 answer choices. But how do we decide between A and C? We notice that C doesn't use as or unlike. So that's kind of weird. So we might go, okay, C's just wrong because it's weird. And that might be a good way to guess on this one. But there's actually another specific rule that can help us eliminate C. So we might notice that we have the word which. Now on the GMAT, which is a signal that we've got something going on. If we see the word which, we should look for modifier errors. So a modifier is a descriptive phrase that modifies or describes the noun that is closest to it. Now on the GMAT, they're very adamant about this. It needs to modify the closest noun. Now, if I were to say, I ran to the store, which made me tired, you would understand that I was saying running to the store made me tired, right? But on the GMAT, they would hear I ran to the store, which made me tired, and go, oh, the store made you tired, because that which phrase is actually closest to store. But that doesn't really make much sense. So we need to pay very careful attention to what the sentence is actually saying and not just what we hear. So if we actually look at this sentence, we see that which is very close to monkfish. So that means that everything after this which and this modifier is describing monkfish. So monkfish contributes to its depletion through overfishing. So monkfish are contributing to their own depletion because they are fishing themselves. This doesn't really make sense, right? Now, it sounds really good, and if we were to say this in real life, everyone would understand what you were talking about. But on the GMAT, we need to pay attention to the grammar rules that go behind it. So we can actually go ahead and eliminate C based on this which rule. So again, we could have gotten really close by just recognizing our error with the comparison, with parallelism. But if we didn't know that rule about which is a very specific rule and one that we don't really need to follow in real life, we probably wouldn't have been able to choose A for sure. So again, kind of a weird rule that we need to know. Go for it.
One question. Can we use the like or as rule to compare prepositional phrases?
Ooh, interesting. Let me think of an example. Let's see. So you can use like to compare a noun with a prepositional phrase to another noun with a prepositional phrase, but it gets kind of complicated if you're just comparing prepositional phrases. I would need to look at an example to give you a better clue on that, but I would recommend going to the Beat the GMAT forum. If you go there and post a specific question with this, I'll be sure to come find it and answer it for you. Okay. So we're moving on to our last question, and you might notice this one's a little bit different than the previous ones. It's a lot shorter. So take a second to read this over, and then we'll chat about it. All right, so this one's a little shorter. Hopefully you've gotten through it. So yeah, this question is much shorter, which you might think, oh, cool, I actually know what this is saying. I don't have to cut out half of this. Awesome. But this might actually be kind of to our detriment, because what it might mean is that any errors in here aren't hidden. They're just, this is all we can do to bring them out. It can also mean that we only have maybe one error. And it might also mean that our errors are less obvious because the test makers didn't feel the need to hide them in a bunch of words. It might be something that's a lot trickier. So be careful when you see a short sentence, it's probably a trap. So we can read through this one, and we'll just start with the original because we want to figure out what's going on. So today's technology allows manufacturers to make small cars more fuel efficient now than at any time in their production history. So remember how we were talking about like and as, how they're comparison words? So is than. So than is an indicator that we've got a comparison. So if we go in, we can go, okay, small cars are more fuel efficient now than at any time in their production history. So we're comparing a time to another time. That's parallel. That makes sense, right? Well, not quite. Let's look at this a little more closely. So we're comparing now to any time. So any time could be the past, it could be yesterday, it could be the future, but it can also be right now. So we're basically saying here, small cars are more fuel efficient now than they are also right now. That doesn't work. We can't compare now to now. So this is something to look out for. When you see than or another comparison word, look out for extreme words. So that could be something like any or all or maybe every, and look for comparison errors. So we can't compare something to itself. This creates a problem, an impossible comparison. So here's an example. Keisha got a better score on her test than all of the students in her class. So again, if I were to say this, you would get what I was saying. Keisha's score is the best. But on the GMAT, what we're actually saying here is Keisha got a better score than all of the students, including herself. Keisha's in her own class. So Keisha can't score better than Keisha because she is Keisha. That doesn't make sense. So what we need to do here is we need to exclude Keisha from that second group. And the way we do this is often with the word other. So we could say Keisha got a higher score on the test than all of the other students in her class. So now we're saying she got a higher score than all of the students except for Keisha, who got the same score because it's her. So let's see how we can apply this to our question. So looking at A, B, and E, we see we have at any time. So this isn't going to work in any of these answer options. We can't compare now to at any time because at any time includes now. So we can go ahead and eliminate A, B, and E. Now, if you look in at C and D, we actually notice that we have the word other. So we've gone in and excluded now or today from our other group. So this comparison makes sense. All right, but we're still between C and D. So at this point, we might be able to guess, but let's see if we can figure out what is really going on. What's our difference? So if we look at this, we just see that there's a slight rearrangement. We see the addition of the word there in D, but this probably doesn't matter. All right, so let's look at C. Today's technology allows manufacturers to make small cars that are more fuel efficient than those at any other time in production history. So we're saying the cars now have a higher fuel efficiency. So we might be making the same number of cars, but the fuel efficiency is higher. Now let's look at D. Today's technology allows manufacturers to make more fuel efficient small cars than those at any other time in their production history. Now this is slightly different. So we're not saying the cars are more fuel efficient. We're saying there are more fuel efficient small cars. So rather than saying that the cars we make now are more fuel efficient, we're just saying that there are now more cars that are fuel efficient. So maybe there used to be 100 fuel efficient small cars, and now there are 200 fuel efficient small cars, but the fuel efficiency itself isn't actually changing. So we've got a difference in meaning here, but which one do we want? Which one is correct? They both make sense and they both seem to be good. On the GMAT, we always want to match the meaning of the original sentence. Always, always, always. Even if the original sentence has horrible grammar errors and doesn't make any sense, we want to figure out what is the message here, what is it trying to say, and then we want to match that in our sentence. So if we look at A, we knew that there were some problems, right? We had now, which is probably a little repetitive with today. We had at any time, which was an impossible comparison, but we see they want to make small cars more fuel efficient. So we want to increase fuel efficiency, not number of cars. So if we remember from looking at C and D, that matches C, not D. So we can actually go in and we can pick C based on an issue of meaning. So with these questions, sometimes even if you know all of your grammar rules, you might just come down to having to analyze the sentence itself and figure out, okay, which answer choice actually matches that meaning. So as much as we go in and simplify our sentences and memorize our rules, blah, 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 sometimes we actually have to read. And that's something that comes in with the hardest questions, because anyone can memorize rules, but it takes a little bit more skill to actually figure out what a sentence is saying. Question.
Okay, we have a couple questions. The first is, isn't the word now redundant because of the today?
Exactly. And I kind of touched on this a little bit. Yes, it is. So redundancy is not quite as important as some of the other grammar rules. So for instance, if we have an error like an impossible comparison, or we have an error in agreement or tense or parallelism, those take precedence. But things like redundancy are actually issues of concision, which we didn't get into a lot here, but concision is a big rule on the GMAT, which is if everything else is correct between two answer choices, we're going to choose the answer choice that says that thing in the least number of words. So in some of these answer choices, we have today and now, which mean the same thing. So we actually don't need to have that now in the sentence. So we didn't touch on this one as much because it's probably not as important a rule to know. But on some of these hard questions, you might come down to issues of concision in a couple of your answer choices. And that might be the thing that's helping you clue in on the correct answer. So great note, again, yeah, some of these questions have a bunch of errors, and this allows you opportunities to eliminate some of these answer choices in multiple ways.
Another question, when you were down to C and D, for the last two options, is another reason to eliminate D because the pronoun there is ambiguous?
Yeah, so this is actually interesting. Didn't bring this up because it takes a little bit of time to go over. We can probably assume in D that there refers to manufacturers, but yeah, it is a little bit confusing. Is it the manufacturer's production history? Is it the car's production history? Not entirely clear. So again, like redundancy, pronoun ambiguity is one of those rules that's kind of at the very bottom of our list in terms of importance. In fact, if you go back and look at that monkfish question, that one actually has an ambiguous pronoun in the correct answer. So I've seen this on forums a bunch of times where folks are going, no, the correct answer can't be right because it has an ambiguous pronoun. But it actually is the correct answer because all of the other answers are grammatically incorrect. So for things like redundancy and ambiguous pronouns, they are important, but they are last resorts. Only use those to eliminate answers if you can't eliminate them in other ways. But yeah, in this case, eliminating for the there would actually work fine and would help us to get to C. So great question.
And then this may be one last question. This may be similar, but someone wrote in, I picked the same answer C, but my thought process was that the subject should come first so that it's in logical order. Small cars should come first so that you're reading from left to right.
Exactly, yeah, and that makes sense. The reason for this is that we're putting small cars so that it's not part of our comparative phrase. So we're saying small cars are more fuel efficient, so we're dealing with fuel efficiency, and you'll notice that's what's happening in A. But indeed, putting small cars later actually brings it into our comparison. So now we're comparing the number of small cars versus that fuel efficiency. So yeah, here that logic totally works, but a really good idea is to think through, why do I want it to come first? What's the reason behind that? Does it affect meaning? Because sometimes relying on our ear can actually lead us to the wrong answer choices. A lot of right answers are pretty awkward. And again, I'll point you to that monkfish question. The correct answer sounds pretty awkward, but it's the only one that's grammatically correct. So be careful about using your ear, but yeah, here it totally works. Okay, so that's our 5 questions. So kind of back to that screen we looked at the beginning. What can we learn from hard sentence correction questions? So we learned that hard questions often rely on memorizing rules, just small things that usually pivot around a single word. One word that might show up once on the test. So it's a really good idea if you have all of your basics down to look at things like idioms and to look at more complicated sentence correction rules and memorize those, have those ingrained in your head so that when you see those words, you immediately go, haha, I know it. This is a trick. This is a classic GMAT thing. We also learned that we can simplify complex sentences to make our lives easier. We actually could have applied this to a bunch of our other questions just to cut out some of that extra stuff. Oftentimes, more obvious errors are hidden in very complex sentences. And if we just go through and take out extra information, those errors will jump right out at you. We also learned that multiple errors in a sentence means multiple chances to get it right. And your guys' comments were actually great for illustrating that point because you pointed out a couple of other places where we could have gone in and eliminated other answer choices to get to our answer as well. Finally, we learned that in some cases, we just have to read the sentence and figure out what it means. So as much as we know our rules and we know our tricks on the GMAT, sometimes we just have to read. And we always, in that case, want to match our meaning to the original sentence. So if you liked these questions and you go, that's great, how do I get similar hard questions? There aren't that many hard, real GMAT questions out there. What if I'm out? What if I want this kind of really detailed explanation for every single hard question I run into? Here at PrepScholar GMAT, we really believe in providing high quality materials. So we've gone in and analyzed these real GMAT questions, figured out what kind of skills are being tested, what kinds of question types, what types of answer types, what types of phrasings, what types of skill pairings are really common, what levels do different skills appear at. And we've gone in and used this to adapt new questions that are as close as you can get to the real GMAT without actually using the same questions over again a second time. We also use practice tests that are published by GMAC as a way to mark your score. So you practice with our GMAT questions and then you test yourself with real GMAC materials. We also have instructors that know the GMAT inside and out. So they graduated from top universities and MBA programs, they have tons of teaching and tutoring experience, and they have top 1% GMAT scores. So not only does this experience allow them to write the best GMAT questions, but it also allows them to write the best GMAT explanations that will cover all of these different facets of the questions and how we can get these questions right every time. There are also a ton of other cool features such as adaptivity so that we can make sure that if you're not at the level for 700 questions yet, you're not going to get them quite yet. Or if you are ready for those, we're not going to waste your time with something that's easier. We're also going to target skills that you need. So if you really struggle with idioms but parallelism is no problem, we'll make sure that you get idiom questions and not parallelism questions, or that the parallelism questions you do get are at a much higher level. So if you're interested at all in checking out PrepScholar GMAT, we have a $100 off course code for everyone who's still here. Thanks for sticking with us this long. So the code is SC100 off, so 2010. And here SC is for sentence correction. Makes sense. Pretty easy to remember. Again, if you want to copy that down now, that's a good idea, but it'll also be available on the YouTube channel later. So you can go ahead and use that for our completely customized course, which is the $399 course, and you can enter that code at checkout to get $100 off. We also have a free 5-day trial. So you can try that product out for 5 days. If you don't really like it, it's not really vibing with you, that's fine. You can go ahead and get totally refunded after the 5 days. So we have our website at the bottom. Again, if you want to copy it down, that's www.prepscholar.com/GMAT/S.
So a couple of quick questions that came in. Do we have videos? So we encourage you to check out our YouTube channel that we just launched a couple weeks ago. So if you just look up PrepScholar GMAT on YouTube, you should find that. And we're adding new videos every week.
Yes. Yeah, and if you wanted, if you were interested in our tip about simplifying sentences, we actually just released a video a couple of days ago that digs into that tip in more depth and how you can apply it to get complicated questions right. And it features a problem that we didn't go over today, but it's another 700 level program or problem. So I highly recommend you take a look. We've also got a video on how to crack 700 on the GMAT, and we'll have new videos shortly.
So we're just about out of time. I have 2 questions that are general for everyone, and then we have 2 questions that were specific to questions that we went over. So if those people want to stick around. The more general questions is, the first one is, realistically, how long should we be spending on sentence correction questions?
Yeah, so for an individual sentence correction question, what I highly recommend, I don't have the numbers with me, unfortunately. I wish I had this memorized off the top of my head. What I really recommend doing is going in and taking the total number of minutes for the verbal section, which I believe is 75, and dividing it by the total number of questions for the verbal section, which is high 30s. But I don't have that number memorized. Is it 37? It's something like that. Someone correct me in the comments. And going in and doing that division and going, how much time do I have per question? Then you need to go in and figure out what's right for me. So if you are pretty good at sentence correction, maybe you want to limit that amount of time. If you're a slow reader, you might want to save some of that time for your reading comprehension passages. It's possible that you'll end up with slightly longer passages with less questions, something like that.
And it's 41.
41? Seriously?
For verbal?
For verbal?
Yep.
Is it less for verbal? Wow. I had it mixed up. So yeah, it depends on you. You can use that division as a baseline, but it really does depend on what you need the most for your score. If you're in a situation where you're spending too much time for sentence correction questions, remember, process of elimination is your friend. There are a lot of ways to eliminate answer choices, and sometimes just getting through one of those things and going, you know what, I'm just gonna guess C between B and C is gonna be good enough. So don't waste too much time. You don't need to find every error. Do what's right for you and for the other sections.
All right, and then real quick, the other more general question is there a resource where you can read about the rank of rules? So you had mentioned that pronoun ambiguity was relatively low on the priority list. Is there a place there that you can see all of the rules kind of in prioritized order?
Interesting. That's a really good question. We have a lot of really useful resources for specific sections on our blog. I'm not sure if we have anything that targets that in particular, but it might be something that is mentioned in one of our sentence correction articles. If you go to our blog, which is just the PrepScholar GMAT blog, there is a tag for GMAT sentence correction questions. You can go through and read different articles on those, and hopefully it'll touch on that issue that you're mentioning here. I also highly recommend searching around on the Beat the GMAT forum to see if you can find that anywhere. But in general, what we want to think about is that grammar is more important than rhetoric. So grammar is just our hard and fast rules, and then rhetoric is things like how good does the sentence sound. So things like redundancy, etc., are in that rhetoric category, and those fall at the bottom of the list.
Great. As long as the Beat the GMAT presenter will let us continue for 5 more minutes. We have 2 specific questions that we just want to answer.
Yeah.
So Soren, as long as that's okay with you, we're going to dive into these. The first one is for question number 1.
Ooh, okay. Let me just really quickly fly back through these slides. Okay, question number 1.
All right, so this person is having a hard time understanding or differentiating between when something is a misplaced modifier at the beginning versus an introductory clause.
Yeah.
Any tips or tricks for how to do that?
Yeah, great question. So we can actually really treat our modifiers and our introductory clauses the same way. So if it's a modifier versus an introductory clause, they're really the same thing. There's something that's extra information that's set off with a comma. So if we're trying to figure out sentence correction errors, we can take all of our modifiers and cut them out. In this case, cutting out all of that stuff helped us to hone in on other errors, but sometimes it's actually an error with our modifier. In some cases, you're gonna go through and cut out all the extra information and your sentence is gonna be totally fine. And then you're gonna go, wait, what's the issue? Then you need to look at your modifiers. And so it might be an error within them grammatically, or it might be that they are misplaced. So we didn't have any real issues with misplaced modifiers here, but here, based on records from ancient Athens, could have been a misplaced modifier. In this case, it wasn't. So again, what we want to think about is kind of like with our which, we want to make sure that our modifier is modifying the thing that's closest to it. So make sure that the thing that's before that comma is describing the noun closest to it and not something else, if that makes sense.
And if these answers aren't answering the specific question, you're welcome to email us at gmat@prepscholar.com and we can help better clarify.
Absolutely. And if you have a specific question, feel free to post that on the Beat the GMAT forum, and I will come find it and I will answer it, Mario.
Then our second question is specific to question number 2.
Okay.
What is the phrase start with "it's trying to modify"?
Yeah, so I'm thinking B here is what we're talking about. All right, so we didn't actually go into too much detail on B because it was the correct answer and we were able to eliminate everything else. But here, it's is actually modifying Europa. So we see here that we have Jupiter's moon Europa has long been considered far too cold to support life. So our subject is Jupiter's moon Europa. So it's afterward is going to modify the subject of that sentence. So here it's is referring to Europa. So this could be an issue perhaps if we didn't have its, we had their. That would be an agreement error, kind of like the one we saw with Holstein cows. But yes, here it's is describing Europa. And if we were to go into B, we could actually eliminate everything from it's to the end of the sentence because it's just extra information. And so we would actually end up with a complete sentence even without all of that extra info.
Great. That's everything. So if you want to maybe put up the coupon code page from last time.
Okay, cool. All right, we're gonna blast through these slides all the way to the end.
And like we said, any other questions, feel free to post either on Beat the GMAT forums, and I don't know if you can tag Erika on them so she sees them, but she'll be looking for them. Or you're also welcome to email us at gmat@prepscholar.com.
Awesome. So again, here is our code that you can use for the completely customized course at checkout to get $100 off. And you can email us at gmat@prepscholar.com. And thank you so much for being with us today. We really enjoyed giving this webinar and hopefully you found it helpful.